Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer emails from patrons and YouTube members. So, and by the way, if you want to email me, go to the website. That's the only way to really get a hold of us. We ask all the necessary questions on that form. You know, if you just, if for some reason, if you have my email address or if you DM me or if you comment on YouTube or something, I don't know if I have permission to read it on the air. I don't know how you want me to refer to you as. I don't have all the disclaimers. Anyway, so website, Psychology Scout. So long-term anonymous patron and clinician, she wrote in and asked the following question. I attended Antioch University for grad school. That's, by the way, where I teach. And I remember we had one professor who talked about non-offending pedophiles. Okay, so she, back in the day when she was in graduate school, had a professor that was talking about non-offending pedophiles. One of us asked about what appropriate treatment there was available to this population for non-offending pedophiles. The professor endorsed the concept of these folks seeking out people in the kink community who identify as littles, quote unquote, littles. Littles are people who enjoy role-playing wherein they take on childlike traits. They might speak in childlike tones or engage in childlike activities as a part of sexual gratification. For some people, that might mean wearing a onesie or a diaper. For others, it may mean acting out in the style of a bratty teenager, etc. So it sounds like, there's a lot of variability there. One common coupling within the kink community would be what they call a DDLG, or daddy dom little girl relationship. I don't remember if this concept was discussed in your interview with Jay, and it wasn't mentioned in your interview with Brandon. I was hoping you might be able to comment on the concept of daddy dom little girl type relationships as a potential viable way for non-offending pedophiles to seek ethical sexual gratification. Thanks for all that you do. Your work has been quite impactful on my work as a clinician. End of email. Well, anonymous long-term patron, it's always, I'll get to your question in a second. It's a good question. But whenever I hear from other clinicians that my podcast has been impactful, that is extremely gratifying to me. I am at heart a professor and a supervisor and a therapist, and for many, many years, 25 years, majority of what I was doing was mentoring and teaching and guiding and trying to help clinicians to develop and to get their client base going and to deal with all the countertransference and to learn all the stuff. And so when I started this podcast almost 17 years ago, one of the outcomes I was hoping for was that clinicians out there would have another resource that they could voluntarily consume as a part of their broader ongoing education and support and professional development work. And so it's great to hear. So my answer to your question about no maps or non-offending minor attracted persons using the child play or the DDLG, daddy dom little girl, or to find a little, someone that's an adult that role plays as a child. It's a complicated, long answer that I'll try to do briefly. So as a caveat, I just want to say there's nothing wrong with littles. There's nothing wrong with that particular, there's nothing wrong with any consensual kink, and kink by definition is consensual, right? So I want to be clear that if someone gets sexual gratification by wearing a diaper and someone gets sexual gratification by being with someone that wears a diaper or whatever, or role plays as whatever they want to role play as, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. In fact, I celebrate it. Consensual sexual activity is half the reason why we're on this planet, maybe most of the reason why we're on this planet. So I support it, I applaud it, and in our society, Today, we've done a lot of work to educate people on oppression and stigma across a lot of domains, including sexuality. And for example, you won't hear at least as many fat jokes anymore. You won't hear as many trans jokes anymore. Of course, we want to eradicate all of that. Or, I don't know, rape jokes or something that were much more prevalent in the past. They still are to some extent, but, we're raising awareness of like, well, who's the joke on exactly? And you have to understand where everyone's coming from. And there are populations of individuals that we traditionally will discount and stigmatize and harm, and it's not okay to bully them as a stand-up comic or just talking amongst your friends. But one of the areas, and we have a lot of work to do in a lot of arenas, but it's still okay, at least from my anecdotal experience, for people to make fun of people's kinks. I will hear people saying things like, well, I don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but that diaper thing, that's like really weird stuff. That kind of, and all that stuff has to go. It's regressive, it's harmful, it's not particularly funny. So I just want to say that up front. Now, to answer your question, long-term anonymous patron, who's also a clinician, which I could boil it down to, is it a viable treatment regimen for, say I have a client who is is recently starting to go down the road of trying to manage their impulses to act out their minor attraction, their pedophilia. And they are looking for ways to lower the risk that they're going to act on it, or they're looking for ways to get gratification. And this is a pretty common topic in the treatment of pedophiles, and also for people who are not recreationally, but are there's a lot of people, in fact, I would guess anecdotally, most non-offending minor attracted persons are not going through therapy to help them with their impulses, and they're cobbling together their own regimen, their own approach, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but often it's a result of either them correctly or incorrectly assuming that therapists are going to call the police or stigmatize them or something like that. So anyway, but so it's a known topic or a known question, and a very important one, which is, well, there's really two questions. One is, well, the broader question is how, okay. So there are two questions. One is how do we lower risk of harm happening to other people for this individual? How do we lower the risk of this individual harming children? And also the second question is, which is often left out, is how do we meet this person's needs, given that their part of their need structure involves them harming other people or potentially harming other people, right? So children. So how do we approach that? And it's a case-by-case basis. There's a lot of variability. There's no one-size-fits-all. Everyone's coming from a different place. But so there's that. The other thing to look at is, well, what does the research show? And there is, some research in this area, but I could not find any research specifically addressing the littles kink or the daddy dom little girl kink as a potential sublimation or replacement for the impulse. I'll say anecdotally that the individuals that I know that are not offending minor attracted people would not find this to be a useful replacement because they know that the individual role playing is not a child. And so it wouldn't work for them. Like an analogy would be, let's say that you have a heterosexual, well, let's say you have a man and a woman who are married, and then down the line, because of oppression and family dynamics, the husband has been denying his own sexual orientation, which is to not be straight, which is to be gay. And at the age of 40 years old, he finally just says, I can't do this anymore. I'm living a lie. And I want to tell my wife that I'm gay and I'm attracted to men. And so let's say in this scenario, and this is just off the top of my head, that let's say that, there's a lot of talk and a lot of worry and maybe a lot of hurt and a lot of hope for the future. Let's say that the wife says, well, maybe we can stay married if I role play as a man. Well, I think for most people, even if they're not gay, would understand that that wouldn't work for most people, right? Because, role playing, we can hand ourselves over to that sometimes, right? Whether it's kink or playing Dungeons and Dragons, role playing. But there's for most of us anyway, there's a pretty sharp distinction between role playing and fantasy and storytelling and make-believe and reality, right? It's actually a known thing within kink that a lot of our kinks or our fantasies are only attractive for us if they are fake. Like, there is a lot of research on rape fantasies, people having sexual gratification of fantasizing about being raped or about raping. And for the and it's a very common fantasy that people have. When they ask people on surveys, some research will find that a good half of individuals will report having occasional fantasies. Don't quote me on this. This is off the top of my head, but it was, from my memory, half of, I think it was women that they were studying, reported that occasionally they would have fantasies of maybe not what they would call rape, but coercive behavior, sexual acts from a partner that is not stopping for consent. That kind of language has to be, because if you just ask people, do you have rape fantasy? They'll be no. But when you actually look at the kinds of things that are written in a romance novel, at least for experts anyway, it definitely is. It's not consensual. There was no indication of consent. Anyway, you get my point. And all those individuals, or the vast, 90, they'll also ask them in some research, how would you feel if you actually had this happen to you in real life? Some stranger on the bus, I can't remember the stat, but something, 98, 99% of people that had that fantasy said, oh, no, I do not want that to happen in real life. That is the opposite of, I'm not turned on by that, and I wouldn't be turned on by that in real life. In fact, that would be traumatizing as it would for anybody. So we understand that there's a difference between fantasy and reality, and when it comes to individuals and who they might have either been born with or developed into in terms of the partner that they're looking for, for a lot of people, it's not malleable, and it's also not possible for someone to role play as someone and for the individual to just put that aside. You know what I mean? And this is just anecdotal because I could not find any research specifically investigating this question. There is research on sublimation and replacement, but not with this in particular. It is a good question, but again, anecdotally, I would imagine most. Now, for some of you, you might be thinking, hey, Kirk, you are talking about a sexual orientation. Are you claiming that pedophilia is a sexual orientation? Well, we have to define sexual orientation. If we define it at its most basic level, which is the definition, and this isn't the strict definition, or this isn't the technical definition, because I'm just going to say it off the top of my head, but the definition of sexual orientation is who you are oriented to, the type of people that you're oriented to, or even the type of object, right? There are some people that seemingly have orientation sexually towards objects, right? And we have a lot of research trying to determine where that comes from. And the long and short of it is we just don't know. It appears that we are adaptable as people. It also appears that there's a natural variance among people that might have been beneficial evolutionary-wise. There's all these just so stories that people say, like one of the ideas or hypotheses is that, gay people in the distant past, they wouldn't have offspring. So how can that trait be selected for, at least among a population? Well, maybe they would help as an aunt or an uncle, you know what I mean? Anyway, you get my point. I'm meandering. But if we just talk about sexual orientation as the type of object that you are oriented towards, that turns you on, then yeah, pedophilia is a sexual attraction, right? But if we define sexual attraction or sexual orientation, what I say, then it is a sexual orientation. If we define sexual orientation as a legitimate, legal, ethical, consensual type of relationship, then of course we would not include pedophilia, right? So, I'll just say that. Regarding the research, there is some research that looks at child sexual abuse material, or what is traditionally called child porn, right? Or, child sexual abuse material, CSAM, for short, CSAM, CSAM. That material for some individuals can help them to sublimate or replace or lower their risk of offending, because they're able to use that and masturbate and have that need, or at least part of their need, met through that material, using it sexually. Okay, so there is some research on that, but there's also some research that suggests, and the reason why I'm using the word suggest is because it's really hard to lock this down, and we want to be very careful when we're experimenting on humans so that we do so ethically, and we, anyway. So it can be hard to lock this down. Like an easier question, an easier inquiry to look into would be to say, I'm trying to think of a psychological study, how much does looking at nature affect your energy level? Then you can take a group of people and you say for a day or two, you restrict half of the people so that they can't see nature at all. They have no windows, or there's no nature on their phone or computer or whatever. You take another group and they have access to looking at nature occasionally, and then you ask them their energy level. Anyway, you get the point. So that is less invasive. There's still ethics that you have to be mindful of, and you have to get approval from the IRB. Anyway, so when it comes to CSAM, it is suggested by research that it can help for some, but it could also harm, and it also could just not affect for some individuals in terms of their risk of going down a road of beginning to harm children, right? So it's a case-by-case basis, and that's the case whenever we're talking about any complicated impulse that one is trying to manage. Like if we talk about addiction, for example, for some people, it's important that they go to AA every day. For other people, not. For some people, it's important that they, exercise. They replace the drinking with being very into exercise. And other people say, well, that's just another form of addiction, so you're still involving the escape behavior, and it's sort of all or nothing, and you will eventually come back to alcohol because you're not really, it's case by case. It's so when it comes to an individual who is attracted to minors and they are asking for help, we have to tailor the treatment plan to them, and we have to experiment with things, So might the Little's kink help someone? Sure. But it's not, it certainly isn't something that would work for everyone. So if we return to those two questions, how do we reduce the risk of harm happening to other people, and I suppose to the client as well? And how do we meet the needs of the client for both romance and sex, which, people have varying levels of libido or need there. So, there's a lot of variability there. And let's say that I had a client and they suggested they were trying, we're in the beginning of treatment or we're in the early phase, and they are looking for ways to manage their risk because they don't have a solid regimen yet. If you listen to my episode with Brandon, he seems like he has, at least from his report, a pretty solid regimen. He doesn't need any help, according to his statements, right? He reports that he doesn't have any risk, that he doesn't have any impulse, that he has already worked really hard on how to manage everything, and he has a system, and it works for him. So for, let's say, hypothetically, I had a client that was in that early phase, and they're still trying to figure it out, and they bring it up to me, and they say, I would like, I heard about this littles thing, and I thought about giving that a try to see if that would actually, at least to some extent, get my needs met that way. Maybe I should suggest that to my next, or I was going to say Tinder date, but but there are kink apps and kink communities and online meetup or ways of connecting. There's probably like a Facebook page for like Seattle kink people, or even littles, right? There's probably like a some sort of hashtag, or I don't know, and good, people should be able to match up with their people. But anyway, so let's say he's contemplating that, and he asks me if that's a good idea, and I would say, yeah, let's monitor it, and let's see if that would help. I would probably say it's probably not the only thing we need to do. There's probably a lot of things, and it also is a risk. It actually could provoke something in you that could actually raise your risk of going down a road of harming others. So we'll just have to, see. So yeah, let's experiment with that. But I would not suggest that to a client without them bringing it up, because we have already a lot of things that seemingly work for a lot of people. Like stabilizing their life is a big one. Helping them with their attachments, helping them with emotional awareness and regulation, helping them with their shame, helping them with their relationships, sometimes just financially helping, because these are all triggers. And when these individuals, for anyone, when your life is not going well, then you're at greater risk of engaging in what I suppose we could call self-destructive behavior, or ways of distracting yourself, or and it's well known through lab experiments that in order for us to exert control over our impulses, our prefrontal cortex, for it to be able to say, I want to do that, but that's not a good idea for anyone, including me. We need to have a lot of cognitive resources, which means that our lives have to go fairly well. We have to be well rested. We have to have a good diet and exercise and health in our life, our self-esteem. Anyway, so all those things. Also, trauma recovery for a lot of these individuals, not all, but for many, they have been traumatized. And so there are things that we know work to reduce risk and provide the individual with the platform so that they can get most of their needs met. And we don't need necessarily the littles, the daddy dom little girl intervention, if you will, or the practice, or the distraction, or the replacement. If someone wanted to explore that, yeah. But if that's, and I think this illuminates what I think might be a misunderstanding from a lot of people, I'm not sure, that the primary goal of treatment for pedophiles is to just help them to direct their sexual energy towards something that isn't children, that isn't going to harm anyone. And yeah, I suppose as part of the broader picture of treatment and risk management, it's certainly a question that one could ask, and it's typically around CSAM and that kind of stuff, or even just fantasies. So yeah, those are conversations, but it's a smaller part of a much broader treatment regimen. Like I said, emotional regulation, mental illness treatment, trauma recovery, shame management, relationships, attachment, stability, all those things give the individual, one, the resources to tackle the situation. But for some people, just having a stable life and a stable job and a stable friend circle or stable relationships with their family and ways of having a good life, like they like to go hiking and they like to make art or whatever, then people tend to have a much easier time managing whatever level of impulse that they have regarding anything, whether it has to do with minor attraction or it has to do with a tendency towards compulsive behavior, whether it's gambling or alcohol, or, So that's my answer to that. And let's take a break and we get back more of your questions. All right, we're back from the break. This next email is from Tom from New York. He says, I have heard about alpha male boot camps. Alpha male boot camps. These boot camps claim to offer men a way to develop assertiveness, strength, etc. And then Tom actually provided a link to a particular alpha male boot camp. And I won't mention the actual boot camp, but I will read what they're claiming on their front page anyway. And so they say, your family deserves the best version of you as a leader, husband, and father. Your family deserves the best version of you as a leader, husband, and father. And then there's a video. I'm not going to watch it. And then it says, this boot camp has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, MTV. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but then it says, attention, this boot camp is only for entrepreneurs, executives, and leaders who are ready for a serious breakthrough. It's all capital, all caps, breakthrough. So this project is only for entrepreneurs, executives, and leaders who are ready for a serious breakthrough. This exclusive experience isn't, all caps, for anyone who's just starting their self-development journey. This in-depth experience is for men who are seriously ready and tired of making excuses. Okay, well, just commenting on this language, it's a segment of, I guess, self-help or online talk that I have a hard time relating to. And the words that it's, because there's themes that I'm seeing that are common among a lot of these efforts, whether it's a boot camp or people talking about being alpha male, or whether you're someone like Andrew Tate, or there's certain words that are definitely saying a particular thing, and they're trying to appeal to the both brainwashing of men by our society. Anyway, so the word, this is a serious boot camp. It's for entrepreneurs, executives, and leaders, and those all have capital first letter, which doesn't make sense, but this is for entrepreneurs, executives, and leaders. And it's like, so if someone wasn't an entrepreneur, say they have a salary job somewhere and they're not an executive and they don't really think of themselves as a leader, then they're not invited. It doesn't make any sense. But it, I think, taps into, oh God, where do I begin? You have, I'll say this very briefly, because I've talked about this more at length in other episodes, but you have a situation in our society where we have men and boys who are being programmed with a lot of the old traditional aspects of masculinity. And some of those aspects are toxic and some of them are neutral and some of them are positive. And I've talked about that already, but there's that. And boys are being socialized from the age, they've done research that children as young, I think, don't quote me on this, as young as like 12 months already understand, or maybe 18 months, I can't remember. It's a very young age that children already understand that boys do this and girls do that. And they will act, accordingly, or do things, react to others accordingly anyway. And they've even done research on families where the parents are aware of the problems of socializing your children this way, and they find that those children still have those impulses and those associations, either because the parents can't help it, because it's impossible to completely deprogram ourselves, and or they're being socialized by the outside world all the time. If they interact with anyone else at school, or if they look at an advertisement, or they're playing a video game or something, there are messages about a lot of things, including what makes a boy and what makes a girl, right? So we have that, and as a product of that, we have a lot of young men who have been programmed in a explicit, sometimes explicit, but the vast majority of the programming is implicit, meaning it's not overt, right? And they definitely value certain things, and they're striving for something. And it was explained to me, I can't remember where I heard this, but when I heard this explanation or this aspect of toxic masculinity, I was like, oh my God, like that really says it all. That, and I have this, by the way, like, I wasn't raised on another planet. So it's the very firm notion that in order to be worthy as a human being overall, if you are a boy, if you're a man, you have to be seen as properly masculine. And if you're not properly masculine, if you don't demonstrate, if people don't see you that way, if you don't see yourself that way, not only are you not masculine, and therefore all the insults, whether people call you a pussy or a wimp or whatever, or literally just a girl, which I find to be a funny insult. It's like, oh my God, you're such a girl. How's that an insult? But it is in our society because of sexism and misogyny. But anyway, so you have all these boys and men who, have varying levels of self-esteem, but even men with a lot of self-esteem cannot get away from the notion that is in their bones, and not all men, but a lot, that is in their bones. It's in my bones that if I don't establish myself as properly masculine, or if anything threatens the notion to myself and to other people that I'm not properly masculine, then not only am I not masculine, which is, horrible according to this brainwashing, but it also makes me completely unworthy as a human being. I am completely irrelevant. I have no worth to anyone. I don't have worth romantically, sexually, occupationally, familially, parenting-wise, financially. I have, and it sounds ridiculous, right? Because of course it's not true, but also it just seems like it's going too far. No, when I heard, I can't remember how it was worded to me, but when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that hits me right between the eyes. That just exposes something that has been in my bones. Why is it in my bones? Because I was programmed that way. My parents didn't particularly socialize me. I don't remember things along these lines. I mean, there were some moments that I can point to, but overall, I would say, my parents weren't, rigid in this way at all. But society and As a young person, I remember in the 80s realizing I didn't have the words for it, and I certainly didn't have a sophisticated understanding of it. Well, like one example, so I would notice these mandates from society around what it is to be a proper man or woman or teenage. So, and I didn't like to be hemmed in. I didn't like to be pigeonholed. I didn't like to be limited. And one manifestation of that was at Thanksgiving at my house that I grew up in, my family house. It was on the main floor. There was the living room with the TV that would have football, and then there was the kitchen, which was where all the food was being prepared and everything. And although I love watching football, I like hanging out with the men in my family. It's relaxing. You don't have to do any work. So all the men would go into. So that's all the men, all the large family, extended family, all the men in the living room, all the women and the girls in the kitchen. And I don't know, I was probably like 15 or something, and I remember just kind of noting that, like, whoa, that's kind of interesting. And I thought, I don't like that feeling. I don't like to be hemmed in. I also don't like what's, is this good or bad? Like, I don't want to just hand myself over to it. So I purposely went into the kitchen and found it actually to be better there. I mean, they still didn't ask me to do anything. So I guess I had the best of both worlds because of the gender associations. But I had all the conversation and the laughter. There's a lot more conversation and laughter that was happening in the kitchen. So now, I'm not saying that I was effective in rebuking gender association and toxic masculinity, not in the least. But anyway, so we have a lot of men, particularly young men, who have been programmed this way. But we have a society currently that, at least overtly, is not okay with a lot of toxic masculine traits and behavior, right? And so you have in the public discourse, and maybe even among their friends or in public spaces or online in particular, or when they're dating, they're experiencing this dissonance between what they were taught, and by taught I mean like round the clock, and sometimes explicit messages from their parents or whatever, or in their church or whatever, or from a online thing. But most of it is implicit. Most of it is covert. The modeling, the way people react, that kind of stuff. And so they have that force inside of them that is saying, and it might not be the primary focus of their life, but it's a big one of like, make sure that you establish yourself as properly masculine. And when in doubt, be hyper masculine, overshoot the mark so that you can make sure everyone understands that you are a proper man. And that, that involves being violent. It involves being non-emotional, not showing emotion, not, even believing yourself that you don't have emotion or you don't have any weaknesses. Making sure you signal everyone that you have a lot of money and that you have a proper job, like you're an entrepreneur, an executive, or a leader, that you have lots of muscles and that you're tough and you're not a pussy and you're not a girl and you don't like girl things and you don't talk about your feelings and you don't watch Sex and the City and you like trucks and you like the proper masculine politician and you listen to podcasts that are properly, it's constant. So they have that force that's happening for them, but then they have this massive force from the outside that is saying, don't do that. And it's coming in a lot of different messages. Some of it is helpful, like, hey, you have other options and you have worth regardless. Okay, that's a helpful message. But a lot of messages from society are not helpful. Like, you are a misogynist, or you are broken as a human being, or you're a bigot, or I don't want to date you because of this, or you're disgusting, or whatever, I can't really think of a lot of good examples, but you get the idea. And, these individuals, they're just trying to live their lives from minute to minute. And particularly for people that might have some complicated feelings around masculinity because they were abused growing up, they felt weak growing up, or they feel weak now because, it's hard to get a job in today's economy, or they're being oppressed for whatever reason, or they're closeted in some way, you know what I mean? And they don't have, these people wake up in the morning and they look for answers, naturally. Well, there's a huge, influential online presence that is probably not in your echo chamber. It certainly isn't in mine, but it's out there, these alpha male boot camps being one of them, that is there to tell you all the right things, that all those feminists are wrong. This is the red pill, the incel, the MGTOW, the pickup artist community. There's other words, the Andrew Tates, all that stuff. Those communities exist and make billions of dollars every year because there's a need, because our society is so bad at communicating to these people and so over the top in their judgment of, it's somewhat, a 20-year-old young man doesn't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to just arbitrarily decide to adhere to toxic masculine ideas, as if they have a choice. They've been programmed. There's no choice. Plus, they're in a context that even if they did make that choice, their lives would be negatively impacted by that, even if they just thought certain thoughts. It would be noticed. Anyway, so now I'm not saying they're all victims. There is a volitional choice that people can make, and there are other resources online. And I do, judge certain individuals if they go down a road without stopping to look around and question things that lead to harming other people, including other men, these alpha male boot camps. Anyway, so we have such a piss poor way of reacting to these individuals as a group, as a society, that where else are they going to go? And they're between a rock and a hard place. And for a lot of these young men, they can decide, okay, either I just I give in, and maybe even I kind of agree with the criticism against toxic masculinity, but I have no way of navigating my inner feelings, and so I will feel less of a human being, not just less of a man. That was the thing that really hit me through the eyes. It's not just feeling like you're not a man, or you're not the proper man. It's that you're not relevant as a human being in any context. So, and the opposite is true, is that when you are seen as a proper masculine male in whatever context it is, then you can do anything. You can be the executive. You can be the entrepreneur. You can be the Chad who gets the girl. You can, people will, when you say something, they believe you. When you try to get something going, people follow you. It's real. We study this kind of stuff, right? So, case by case basis. But you get my point. So, these individuals either have to basically say, I guess I just have to, if I'm going to live in harmony with the people around me, then I have to consider myself maybe lesser of a human being, and that's that choice. The other choice is I have to alienate everyone around me and join kind of like a cult, and also get the benefit of feeling like I'm in line with what I was programmed to be, which is a properly toxic male. But I don't have a mentor, a guide, because my dad is a feminist, or, and I say that in a positive way, or at the very least, my dad just really isn't hyper masculine, or my dad isn't around, or whatever, And so, and certainly online in typical circles, there isn't any guidance. And there's these charismatic figures that are saying the right things, and I get a community. I get friends. I get validation. I get someone maybe I can even cry with, because that's what's happening in the alpha male world. Is it's not just all about lifting weights and, I don't know, shooting guns or whatever. A lot of these charismatic alpha male leaders and gurus are incorporating things into their style because of the movement in our society towards mental health and emotional awareness and, dare I say, less toxic masculine ideas. And so the alpha male, there are some gurus today, particularly if we're talking about in the United States, that either to appeal to everyone, because, the younger generation is much more aware of mental health and emotions and grief and processing things and talking about your feelings than any other generation maybe that's ever lived, honestly. I don't even know, but definitely in my lifetime. And so the gurus have to at least appeal to it in a masculine way, and I would say that's a positive masculine way, that some of them will do that, like I don't know, but I imagine at least the alpha male gurus that are less of a problem are more likely to say things like, in order to, it's weak to suppress your feelings. That's a weakness. It's a strength to feel your feelings and get them out there, It's weak to worry about crying in front of your friends. It's strong, it's courageous to cry in front of your friends, and it's using a masculine vibe for positive, what I would argue to be positive messages. So that's how we can use masculinity, and there's, different ways to use it. It's complicated, but you get my point. So, so getting back to this website. So this was the whole point, was that this website is, this alpha male bootcamp is only for entrepreneurs, executives, and leaders. So what is that saying? What message is it giving? It's giving a message of it's exclusive. So it's a marketing ploy, I imagine. This is just speculating, right? But it also is giving this message of, this is what we can give you, is you will be a success in business, not only just a success in business, but you will be seen as a success in business. You will be an entrepreneur, and a capital E executive, a capital L leader. You won't just be successful, you will be seen, and you will see yourself as possessing a hard to achieve, but a central feature of the alpha male, or of the worthwhile male. That's my interpretation of it. But going through the website a little bit more, many men are secretly fighting a battle within them that no one knows about. So that's one of the big titles, right? And that's, to me, I hear a little bit of sensitivity in there, Many men are because, other alpha male proponents would say that real men don't fight inner battles secretly. They get over, they deal with shit and they move on, But listen, many men are secretly fighting a battle within them that no one knows about. That's not saying many pussies are secret. It just says men, So I would argue that there are themes of influence from positive masculine, anti-toxic masculine sources. It's just, it's the zeitgeist. And they have to appeal. And the gurus have probably been through therapy, or at least might have been through some therapy. I don't know. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt on some level, but anyway. Let's see. That if you flip the switch, you can have the business and the life that you always wanted. So again, what message? So the major titles is what I'm reading. It has to do with entrepreneurial, and I just because that is, I suppose, to some toxic masculine segments, that's the ideal, right? Because you're your own man, right? But I'm thinking, there are plenty of people that work for other businesses or corporations that are very what we would call successful, earn a lot of money, blah blah blah. Anyway, you know that if you flip the switch, you can have the business and the life that you've always wanted. So right there, I don't know, just me speculating and reading into it, and I'm biased. I'm biased against, because I'm not a fan of this kind of stuff. But this has not only elements within the alpha male community, but also just in the world of charlatanry, if you will. And these charlatans have been charlataning for since the beginning of time, I'm sure. And every segment of charlatanry has its own style, but there are themes, and one of the themes is success, money, but also this language of, that if you flip the switch, it's a saying, it's an idiom, but it's also evoking just a quick action, right? If I can just flip, if I can find that switch, boom, it's a toggle on off. I'll be off and running with my own business, and I'll be an executive, and I'll have the life I've always wanted. It doesn't usually work that way, but that's kind of the message. And then there's some videos that I'm not going to watch. And then there's a title here that says, How You'll Flip the Switch in Your Life and Business. Oh, so it's just, and it shows some pictures. So I'm looking at pictures of men, seemingly men at this boot camp. Of course, there's the scene here of a line of, it looks kind of like, I don't know if this is true, but in some segments of the military, maybe in the SEAL boot camp, Navy SEAL, that they at some point will do push-ups in the surf, right? So there's a scene of that where there's a bunch of dudes doing push-ups, in the surf, in the water as the waves. There's another guy, looks like he's in a cold plunge. There's a whole bunch of guys in a line that are standing at attention, and they have backpacks that look kind of like military style. There's another picture of a bunch of dudes running, maybe doing a race as a group, and one of the guys is carrying an American flag. But then there's another picture, what looks to be like a young man who just went through some shit. He looks kind of disheveled, and it looks like a mentor or one of the gurus is standing next to him with his hand on the young man's shoulder, like in solidarity. So there's that. Anyway. And then another title. It all starts with the 75-hour crucible. This 3-day experience is one of the toughest physical and mental challenges you'll experience, and it is designed to help you shatter your self-doubt and limiting beliefs, gain clarity in your life's work and purpose, heal from trauma that makes you feel broken and unworthy. That's interesting. I'd like to see the research on that claim, but at least it acknowledges trauma, I guess, and unworthiness. Dig deep into your past and uncover the experiences that are holding you back from achieving greater levels of success in your life. So I'm going to take a guess and say that if I were to observe one of these alpha male groups, if I was allowed to be an observer and maybe interview some of the participants, I'm going to take a guess and say that I would see the following. Depending on the group, and I can't know this because I've never done this. I've never been to one of these groups. I think I've only seen tiny little clips. Like there were some viral clips, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago of one of these alpha male boot camps, and it was probably one of the bad ones. I'm sure there's varying quality of these alpha male boot camps, but the viral clip I remember seeing was the guru or one of the teachers was just berating people in a very, very demeaning, verbally abusive manner, and it was unrelenting. And you're like, how is that helping these people, and why would they pay money to be there? Is this some sort of kink or something? So I imagine some very horrible things. But I will tell you that I have experienced in my own life an analogous, very analogous to this, which is I was in a fraternity, and we went through what we called Hell Week, which was a week in which the new members went through trials and tribulations. And I won't go into the specific details, partially because I believe it's technically secret, the whole thing. But when I went through it, there's an effect. And this doesn't have to do with gender. This is just anybody. The way it was, I don't know if this was, I think it was specifically hoped to have this outcome, that it would be hard, but not like backbreaking hard. It would be difficult, but it wouldn't traumatize you. You would be humiliated, but not personally humiliated, if that makes any sense. You know, you were humiliated. Like, one of the things we had to do was every time we went through a doorway or an archway in the fraternity, especially if one of the older classmen was watching, was we had to jump up and down a few times and recite something. And, it was, I guess, humiliating on a certain level, because me and 22 other guys were walking through, and we had to carry these backpacks with certain stuff in it. I think one of the things we carried around was like a brick anyway. And so, it was humiliating and not fun and annoying, but at the same time, I'm going through it with my friends, and the older classmen were nice guys. They're not yelling in my face. They're not saying, "You piece of crap." They went through it either last year or a couple years before. And the outcome of all of this was that it not only bonded us as a group that went through it, the new members, but it also bonded us to everyone. It has, I'm sure, and I've studied this before, and I can't remember the details, but this mechanism of the liminal space, if you will, between the before and the after, the ceremony, and goes back to prehistory. The notion of going through, having a sacrifice, going through something difficult. And there's a lot of anthropology and history in this, and even just current culture, that, if you think about, it wasn't one of the stories of Jesus like going off into the desert to fast or something, and communing with God, coming back, or to contemplate a question, or don't quote me on that, but something like that. So, and that's just one of literally millions of other stories that have come and gone, and some are more famous than others. And it seems to be either something that we're taught growing up, or something that might even be kind of innate in us as humans, that to sanctify something and to make it meaningful, to give us purpose, we need some elements of ceremony and sacrifice and togetherness and meaning. And within the hazing that we went through in that week in my fraternity were a lot of purposely infused messages and values that we held, we were, at least purportedly supposed to hold as a fraternity, as a group, that differentiated us supposedly from other fraternities. Probably didn't differentiate us that much, but we didn't know what the other fraternities, because it was all secret, So messages of brotherhood and messages of scholarly work. Like, one of the things that we had to do was we had to go to class. And in order for the upperclassmen to check on us to make sure we were in class, we had to sit in the front left seat of the classroom, so that if an older classman were to check on us, they wouldn't have to, because, they're at the University of Washington, there's literally a classroom that has over 1,000 seats. So you can't expect, and there were all sorts of rules that if someone was sitting in that front left seat, you had to do everything within reason to displace that person and beg them, please, can you just move a couple, this is a frat, I'm going to get in trouble. And also, if you had two younger members in the same classroom, then you sat by pledge order. It's a whole thing. And I went through it. I did not like it. It was extremely unpleasant. I'm not even going into details about, the more unpleasant parts. There were definitely fun parts, but there were also very unpleasant parts. And I mean, not extreme, but the outcome of it was so effective for me and my friends. I'm still friends pretty much with every single one of those guys. And this was 35 years ago, some of these guys I still see on a regular basis, Now, would we still be friends without having gone through that? Maybe. I don't know. But I liked it so much that I volunteered to run Hell Week a couple years later when they needed people to step forward. And I was the one doing the hazing, Again, without going into detail, just for sake of time, but also maybe grossness as well. There was nothing untoward. There was nothing illegal. There was nothing traumatizing. And, in fact, when I was running it, one of the younger members of the frat, who actually was a close friend back then and still is today, actually said, like halfway through, he didn't want to do it anymore. And so, that was allowed, right? We had a lot of talking, but, he wasn't kicked out of the frat. There was no humiliation. There was no stigma. I think looking back, I think he had some issues with authority, which came from his past, which is fine. Everyone, for myself, having my parents as the main authority in my childhood were good parents. I also had a lot of really good experiences with coaches in the various sports that I played. That's a big part. I mean, for me, mentoring therapists, for example, a lot of the modeling that is in my bones comes from all those coaches and teachers and my parents that were critical in who I am today and getting through life. It's confusing when you're growing up. There's a lot of what we might think of now as, fairly simple scenarios, but when you're young, it's brand new. You have no idea, and everything is so big. And there are some key moments of mentors, church mentors as well. Like in my youth group at church, there was a youth pastor that was not very old. He seemed ancient, but he was probably like 25. And there's still things today that I will think or do, and I'll think about him. Just playing guitar, actually, being a musician is part of that, because we would sit around the campfire and sing songs, and he played guitar, and I would watch him, and anyway. So, so at these alpha male boot camps, might there be elements of positive outcome and non-toxic masculinity? There might be. Might it be a combination of things? Might the members who attend react in various different ways? Maybe some leave these camps more toxic male. Maybe others don't. Maybe they realize, oh, wait, a lot of the guys next to me cried, and that guru said that was okay. I didn't expect to learn that lesson. I thought that, in fact, where I come from in my household and my community, my neighborhood, my school, they'd be called a pussy and laughed at, maybe even bullied. And I'm learning here that to be a proper alpha male, not only is it okay to cry, but we need to protect people and value that. Like, that's a new, I'm not saying that's happening, but it might be happening. And from my experience, from the little bit, because it's not in my echo chamber and I don't tend to seek it out, some of these gurus definitely have those kind of notions and have those kinds of elements. I don't think I wouldn't say that they invented it. I would say that they have absorbed other aspects of or variations or modifications to masculinity, and also know that they need to market to younger people and have to adopt what they've been absorbing, So, Tom from New York, getting back to your email. So you say, I've heard of these alpha male boot camps. Here's one to check out. They claim that they can help people develop assertiveness and strength. And then going on with your email, you say, most people online and commentators seem to roundly ridicule the courses and their participants. Are they possibly worthwhile for men to attend? They are expensive and not often run by healthcare or psychological professionals. However, they appear to be popular and perhaps helpful for some people. I am interested in hearing your thoughts. End of email. Yeah, well, I don't know what more to say. I mean, I could say a lot more, honestly, but for the sake of time, what do I say in addition? Your question is, are they possibly worthwhile to attend? It's possible, but, I don't know. Is it that 99% are overall harmful to its members? Or is it 50%? Or is it 25%? Or is it a mixture? Or does it depend on the participants and how they absorb things, right? I could imagine one of these alpha male boot camps, a participant going, and let's say there's a variety of messages and maybe even a variety of gurus and mentors and teachers or whatever. And for one participant, they're like, well, 75% of the messages I'm on board with, but that other stuff, I'm not a fan of. In fact, I want to actively reject that. But that other stuff I like, and I've met a lot of people, and I'm into it, and I've evaluated it, and us from the outside would see that participants' conclusions to be on the up and up, or on the positive side of things, or on the non-toxic male side of things. Yeah. One of the things that a lot of us have lost in our contemporary society, I would argue, due to corporations getting the government to allow the corporations to invade our lives even more. I mean, it's almost universal that if you have a regular salary job in Seattle anyway, then at the very least, you're officially working like 50, 55 hours a week. That doesn't even include the commute, right? In addition to that, you're getting emailed and text at night, on the weekend. There's a culture that is dissuading everyone from taking vacation or sick days. And rewind the clock just 30, 40 years, that was not the case. We fought really hard in this country to establish labor laws to protect the people from the robber barons, from corporations, like establishing a 40-hour work week and certain expectations of workplace safety and also worker rights, labor rights, having breaks and being compensated and da-da-da. And that has been effectively eroded by lobbyists and corporations, and it's just getting worse, as we know. So I would argue that that is the main thing that has pushed it out. But the other thing is just a move away from religion, and there isn't any, or there's for a lot of people, it's hard to find a good replacement if one needs one. Not everyone needs one, but a lot of people do. And so there's this void in a lot of people's lives that can be effectively and maybe positively filled with these kinds of activities. It looks like in these alpha male boot camps, there's a ceremonial aspect to it, right? Line up, everyone dress a certain way, you chant a certain thing, you go to bed at the same time. There's probably like a graduation ceremony of some kind, right? Like you run the gauntlet and then everyone hugs you at the end. I don't know. I don't know if I'm just making shit up here, but I'm just going to take a guess and say that there are, at least in some of these boot camps, some element like that. And it provides tremendous meaning, and it's powerful. I wondered reading that website if they either have backed themselves into, or they know to do this, that when you create a powerful collective emotional experience, it can be transformative. And therapists, many therapists understand this, particularly social scientists do. And I figured this out. What do I say here? So I will say the following, that as a professor, we have incentives by the students who are paying a lot of money to come to graduate school to give them not only an education, but an experience. We, at Antioch, at least in the past, it's hard for me to know what's going on there now because I'm mostly gone. I'm semi-retired, and the vast majority of folks that I worked with and knew have also left just because of various things and time and stuff. But anyway, when I don't know about now, but definitely for my time there, my 25 years there, when I was there full-time, part-time and then full-time, anyway, was that we advertised ourselves as a program as providing both an education and an experience, that you need information, but you also learn through experiential activities. To be a therapist is not to learn a bunch. It's not to memorize a bunch of things. It's not to read a bunch of things. It's not to take a test. To be a therapist is a human, emotional, meaningful experience. It's something you share with another person, maybe multiple people. Anyway, so people would come to us and come to class to learn, but also to have an experience. And the good professors would have a good blending of that. And I strived or strove, which one is it? I endeavored to also have that because I was a student at Antioch, and then I was hired to be a professor. And so I knew what I liked, and that's what I liked. So I endeavored to have that mixture. And to teach knowledge is pretty easy, or at least relatively. To create an experience is hard and nuanced and risky. And you have to be charismatic. You have to sell it, right? Because, some students show up, they're tired. I would teach, in the beginning of my career, I would get the bad slots, and I would be teaching at 7 p.m. at night till 10 p.m. I'd be teaching students until 10 p.m. at night, downtown Seattle. And, people would be dozing off. And that was sort of trial by fire of like, as soon as I saw heads nodding, I realized I wasn't very interesting. And so I learned I have to be very dynamic as a teacher, and I have to keep things moving. And it's sort of like running with weights on, when you take the weights off, it's like you're flying through the air. And teaching at 9:30 at night, it was such a challenge, because they didn't have very much energy. But then once I was teaching at, say, 9 a.m., it was a breeze. I'm like, everyone's, for the most part, ready to go. Anyway, so I learned that just by trial and error and by watching, I had no formal education on this, on how to create an emotional experience, not for clients, because they're not my clients, but create an emotional experience that is ethical, that is moving, that is transformative often, and very memorable. If you've listened to my recent episodes with some of my former students, we talked about class meetings that happened, 10, 15 years ago, and we all remember different details, but it was just one class. It was just like you're at school, but we remember these micro details because I had learned by that point how to engineer an experience in class. And it's not just me. I'm the one that's setting up the framework, but everyone has to buy in. And when you are in a situation like that where the students actually come to the university for those kinds of things, and I get consent and also explain things well so no one's like suddenly dealing with something that's intense. I tell them potentially weeks in advance of certain things that are going to happen, and there's ways for them to sit out or just to not really pay attention. They don't have to if they don't want to. They can stay distant while not being identified as someone staying distant, if that makes any sense. I always engineered that because as a student, I hated being railroaded into things. It's a combination. Anyway, so I learned over time, and I'm trying to think if I want to go over some of the elements of this. I mean, obviously safety is important, but also risk is important. Also, depending on the exercise, having in every group, you learn that there's one person that is much less fearful than others about participating as the focus of the group, right? They're the person that raises their hand, they're the person that volunteers, and they might be completely fearless doing those kinds of things, and they might be desperate to have those experiences for one reason or another. And so often that role, that individual can be utilized by someone in my shoes of just, they're the first person and they lead the way, and then others will see, oh, that wasn't so bad, and then they want to do it, Anyway, so I guess I'm just thinking off the top of my head, that was another element. And so you imagine these gurus, these alpha male bootcamp people, that they either learned this in a similar path, maybe just by doing these workshops or by participating in them, or by doing a parallel self-help thing like Landmark, because they do that. Listen to me and Berto's evaluation of Landmark. The Landmark is a self-help, I don't know how they would describe themselves, but they're a self-help organization, I guess, and you meet as a group and there are classes and stuff. And there are pros and cons to Landmark, and we go over that. But in that episode, I remember anyway, talking about how it's well understood how to create a scenario where people will have an emotional experience. And if they aren't familiar with that sort of thing, because most people aren't, after they leave or in the midst of having that emotional experience, gurus can manipulate people pretty easily. Because, you're riding high. You just had this experience. And, like in Landmark, one of the things that they will do is they will bring people up on stage, maybe in front of hundreds of people, and there will be a fairly intense emotional experience with the guru on stage. And the individual might just be overwhelmed with feelings, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what often, or at least anecdotally, what will happen sometimes is either the charismatic leader, the guru on stage, or maybe a charismatic leader above, or the organization as a whole will sweep in while you're on that high and give you messages that basically say the happiness you're feeling right now is great and good for you, but you need to sign up for these classes because in order to integrate everything you're experiencing or to have it again, or you need to now go out and recruit other people to pay money for the class. It's a well understood. And religions do this too. You don't have to look far in any religion to find that. One could say that those are helpful because they might be. Others are more manipulative and recruiting or whatever. In therapy. So what I'll say is that as a professor, I had a lot of colleagues that were professors, and I observed their work, they observed my work, and I was a student, and eventually I was program director, so I was the boss of dozens of professors. All of them, to varying degrees, had a skill in this area of creating emotional experience. All of them had, for the most part, well, I would say across the board, all of them had ethical, moral justifications for creating emotional experiences. And some of the professors were so good at it that they actually created courses that were, 95% emotional experience and would advertise it as such. And people were attracted to the class because of that. They heard there was an emotional experience, an intense one. They wanted that, and they signed, and it was an elective. They didn't have to take the class. So what I observed was that some of these professors I found to, I don't know the word, too manipulative or too sleazy or too coercive, I guess. I guess the way that I see it and saw it was, as a professor, you're limited in the amount of time that you have with your students, right? The term is only so long, the class is only so long. So in order to, and another element as a professor is that everyone knows who is the more liked teacher. There are certain professors that got better grades at the end of the term, because the students actually would evaluate the professors mid-quarter and at the end. And so people had a general idea of who was beloved and who wasn't. And, everyone wants to be beloved, particularly, I think, professors, because you care about the students and makes sense that you would want their approval. You would want to be seen as an effective and moving and powerful professor, Well, one of the things that in my, evaluation, which is take it with a grain of salt, was that I thought some professors were heavy-handed in their manipulation of students to have very emotional experiences so that they would evaluate the professor in a positive light. That's a terrible thing to say, and it wasn't over the top. I thought, of all the elements and experiences that I saw the students going through, it was maybe like a 3 to 5% part of the overall thing. But I did consider that to be beyond the line that I had for myself, even though I imagine a lot of professors would look at me and what I did with students and say that I was going too far, because, there'd be moments where we're all crying. But, to be a therapist, you got to be comfortable with that. And there's a lot of reasons to cry in the world. So as graduate students and as a professor myself, now I'm not forcing people to cry. I'm not like traumatizing people and then making them cry or anything. Sometimes there's just acknowledgement of humanity and of a fellow student's experience as they're going through something, Anyway, so I've been yammering about this for a while. So alpha male, here's what I would hope, is that everyone gets a chance to have an ethical and safe, emotional, social experience. I say social because I think that's important. I think that's in our bones. Think about crying by yourself at home, and think about crying with 5 of your friends as they're tearing up and hugging you in a group hug. It's different. Think about, think about watching a stand-up comic and laughing on your phone. You're watching a clip of a stand-up comic, or you're watching an entire Netflix special on your phone and you're laughing. And then imagine yourself laughing in the theater with everyone. I don't know about you, but when I'm in the theater, it's 100 times more intense. I mean, I once saw Chris Rock in the mid-90s. I literally thought I was going to pass out because I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. I was literally worried that I was just going to pass out at the Paramount Theater in downtown Seattle. Anyway, so we all understand that it's powerful. I'm not saying everyone needs to go through it, but I think we have a need for it, and we see a lot of manifestations of it, whether it's church, whether it's alpha male boot camps, whether it's cold plunging, polar, what do they call it, where a bunch of people does a polar plunge, is that what they call it? Or going to a concert. You can listen even to a live performance on your phone. Why go to a concert? Well, we need to have emotional, moving experiences. Go, drop an E and go into a rave. If I had a live podcast and people came and I did me and Berto did a podcast in front of a crowd, you could probably just listen to the recording. But what about being in the room, and the feeling that we get when we're together? And so are some of these people getting those very important, and not only just the need for emotional togetherness, but also meaning and guidance and feeling like you've got like a tribe, you've got a crew, you've got your buds, you've got these connections, ride or die. Most people desperately need that, and most people today don't have that, particularly men. Research finds when they survey dudes that, I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something like half of men don't really have a single close friend aside from their partner, and many men don't even have that, right? So, men are particularly at a disadvantage. Everyone's at a disadvantage, but particularly men. And so, do these alpha male boot camps provide that for people? I'm sure that they do. Is it a force for good or a force for bad or a force for mixture, or depends? I don't know. I have seen no research. So I don't know. But I hope that they're positive, I guess. And I imagine there are positive elements. And when we understand this need, and if we decide, maybe with research, that overall the alpha male boot camp messages, at the very least, carry with it too much toxicity, then we as a society, and maybe as a field in psychology, have to provide an alternative. Otherwise, we can't blame people for seeking it out when they desperately need it. That's my answer to that, Tom. Let's take a break. One more email. All right, we're back from the break. Wow, what a long yammering on that topic. Sometimes I come up for air and I'm just like, whoa, wow, that was a road. And it's kind of interesting that without any notes or even pre-thinking about anything, I can just talk for so long. I have a lot of thoughts, and I have listened to a lot of things on these topics, so I guess it's all in there and it all comes like flying out of my face. Anyway, one more email. Long-term patron, Young Sheep, he calls himself. He's a long-term patron, which is defined, according to the form on our website, as 3+ years as a patron. Long-term but we have patrons that are coming up on 10 years, because I started Patreon in the like September-ish or August or something of 2015, and I think there's like 5 or 10 people that signed up in those early weeks and are still patrons, which is just, I am a very lucky, fortunate person, and you all are extremely nice. So long-term patron, Young Sheep, he says, is family systems theory and internal family systems the same thing? Are they used interchangeably? End of email. Well, long-term patron, Young Sheep, I love this question, and I'm worried I'm going to yammer for a long time again because I think a lot about this question. So first I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask. So the first question is family systems theory and internal family systems the same thing? The answer is unequivocally no. Did I use that word right? It's no. They're not even close to being the same thing. Family systems theory is the application of general systems theory, which has it's a, I don't know the language. It's a theory that attempts to explain the behavior of systems, whether it be human systems or chemical systems or biological systems or ecological systems or political systems or organizational systems, all the systems. And it differs from other models of explaining or predicting behavior or phenomena, natural phenomena, in that it takes into account how groups of independently operating elements and components, whether it be people or cells or the flora and fauna of an area, they are all affected by the group, and they all collectively affect the group. It's complicated, but I hope you get the idea. Because typically in especially in Western culture, we tend to think more linearly, which isn't bad. Sometimes in family systems circles, they will use the word linear thinking as an insult. It shouldn't be. Linear thinking has its place. It's just when it's always applied to every situation, like you have an individual who's depressed and an obtuse, linear, limited way of conceptualizing or investigating that individual's depression is to look only at their biology or something, right? Or their cognitive tendencies. The stories they tell or the ways they interpret things, their automatic thoughts. Instead of also inquiring and assessing and looking at the system that they're in, whether it be the family system or their work system or the community or the societal system. Those are also potential factors. And that's a very crude, simplistic way. That's often how it's described, but I don't like it. It's so much deeper than that. And if you listen to my stuff, you're going to hear me either explicitly talk about family systems theory or systems theory, or you'll hear it in my language. It has to do with mutual causality. Like one of the things that I will sometimes apply this to inadvertently, really, it's not on purpose, is when I'm thinking about political divisions. The linear way of thinking is the other sides are jerks and we're good people. But a systems way of thinking about it, and maybe the other side is jerks and maybe we are good people, but in addition to that, and probably more coherent, is that we're all participating in a system that is resulting in each of us on either side of the aisle thinking the other sides are jerks and idiots while we're the good people. There's a system that is creating everyone blaming the other side when there is potential blame that is relevant, but unless we zoom out and look at the big picture, and this applies to any individual psychology, and it also applies to the therapy room. If I am looking at a client in isolation and not considering that I'm a part of this two-person system, then I will be missing out on a lot of content and might be led astray. Anyway, so with so that's general systems theory, and then it was adapted by a lot of really smart people, Gregory Bateson and a lot of others, that understood general systems, which applies to all systems, and they applied it to psychology and to families. And it was a part of a larger movement in the 50s, 60s, 70s that was attempting to understand why people had mental illnesses or certain struggles psychologically. And they were coming at it from a lot of different angles. They were looking at medications. They were looking, cognitive theorists were emerging or starting to really apply their stuff at the time. Behaviorists, psychoanalysts, psychodynamic people were evolving, feminists, and also, in addition, you had systemic people. And we tend to call these individuals family systems. It often is applied to families, but family systems theory or systems theory in general, human systems theory can be applied to anybody. It can be applied to individuals. It's complicated. Anyway, internal family systems is a particular model for metaphorizing the human experience, and it provides a treatment approach that and a way for individuals to frame their own experience so that positive outcomes can be achieved. So, in a nutshell, and I don't use internal family systems because there's another model that I already had. You know, by the time I came across internal family systems, at least in earnest, I had already absorbed object relations and psychodynamic and the particular brand of it that you hear me talk about in terms of internal representations and interjects. You know, listen to all my episodes on psychodynamic stuff and predictive identification and all that stuff. And so when I came across, and schemas is another thing, but when I came across internal family systems, I don't know, like 25 years ago, I was like, oh, I like that, but I already have a framework that is exactly like that, but is just a lot more elaborate and harder to comprehend. Internal family systems is very elegant, and it's very powerful because these ideas. So anyway, internal family systems, and I'm probably going to bastardize it on some level, but it operates on the idea that we all have an internal family, and the internal family is comprised of different parts of ourself. I don't know if this is a language they would use, but this is how I'm interpreting it. And we have different roles that will step forward or will be in conversation with each other throughout the day, throughout life, but particularly it's relevant to moments that we can look at that are problematic for us. Like if, for example, commonly in a marriage that is conflictual, if I'll just apply it, I guess, to me. If my wife, and I can't say that without a Boratification of it, but if my wife, Stacy, let's say that I felt rejected by her somehow, that maybe she was spending a lot of time with her friends and didn't seem interested in me, and when I would reach out to her physically or conversationally, I felt rebuffed or something, and so I'm absorbing that, I'm interpreting it, whatever. And I don't know if internal family systems people would see this way, but at least the way that I see it, especially in the interjection, psychodynamic language and also the schema language, is that there's a certain self, if you will, that will step forward even to evaluate that data coming in. I don't know if internal family systems would do that, but let's go with that. And so let's say that if we go with the internal family systems, there are, let's say, 4 or 5 different people inside of me, or roles or states or modes. And one of the modes is a hurt person, and another mode is the protector. And often in internal family systems, there's the identification of a role like this inside of individuals. Some people call it like the protector or the guard or the policeman or the soldier or the fighter or something, because we all have, in all likelihood, a mode like that comes forward to protect the hurt side of us, right? And so, and I don't know if I'm getting into our family system, but this is generally my impression of it. And so, in order to protect that hurt side of me, that is woe is me, and not really growing up and saying, well, I need to alert my partner. Maybe they would say there's a more core part of me that would know that anyway. And so the fighter comes forward, and that fighter tends to do a certain thing to protect the hurt side of me that might involve avoidance. I'll show her, I'll be distant too, and I'll hang out with my friends all the time. And the next time she wants to kiss me, I'm gonna I'm going to say I have other things to do, or I don't know. And so that's the fighter that's coming forward, but it's not, and it's reacting to this other part of me. Meanwhile, there's another part of me that is like trying to vie for prominence because that part of me is, needful of interaction. I don't know. I'm getting lost in the weeds, but you get the idea. I don't have any of that. I think the long and the short of it is I don't really understand because I've never studied internal family systems. So, but that's generally the idea. So, family systems theory, which is an adaptation of general systems theory, which I butchered in its explanation earlier, is nothing like the butchered explanation that I provided for internal family systems. Okay. Now, the question you didn't ask that I'm going to answer is internal family systems theory, internal family systems, IFS, is internal family systems theory is it a family systems theory? I would argue no. So if you're a clinician, and especially I guess if you're in family therapy, maybe you know stuff, outside of that knowledge circle, you're probably bored. But anyway, so this is a pet peeve of mine that in the family therapy world that I was trained in and also teach in, there are certain theories that we consider to be ours. Family system or systems theory being one of them. There's no inherent reason why general systems theory would be within family therapy, because that's a different thing, right? Family therapy you can do cognitive family therapy, you can do behavioral family therapy, you can do psychodynamics family therapy, and you can do systems family therapy. So family therapy has a lot of overlap with systems theory, but systems theory can be applied to any of the modes of therapy, whether it's a group or individual or family or couple or whatever. So it just, for reasons of history and compatibility, family therapists, early family therapists were the first to really grab onto systems theory, at least noticeably. And so it's considered to be a form of, or within the family therapy umbrella. Anyway, within the family therapy umbrella and the family systems theory umbrella, a lot of theories were developed and co-opted and integrated. So underneath family systems theory, typically emotion-focused therapy is considered to be a couple and family, because it has to do with couples. But really, but there's a huge component of EFT that has nothing to do with couples and families and is talked about in the individual therapy world. But typically, EFT, for people in the know, will say, "Oh, that's under family therapy or couple and family therapy. That's in that world." That you would be taught that in a couple and family therapy program like at Antioch. Anyway, so among all the different theories that are considered in the family therapy realm, internal family systems is one of them. And I could go into the history of it being developed and who developed, because it also has to do with like who developed. If the person developed it was in the family therapy world, then it kind of is automatically considered to be part of the family therapy world, even though there's no reason why. And I would argue there's no reason why internal family systems theory or therapy should be considered under the family therapy umbrella. It has the word family in it, but it has nothing to do with families. It has to do with your internal family, which you could just reword and say your internal parts. It also has the word systems, but it's not a systemic theory. If you understand, at least in the way that we apply general systems and the word systems or systems theory or systemic theories, internal family systems is a very elegant and useful model. A lot of people use it a lot. I know therapists that's all that they do. And you can do a lot of good work. I'm not saying it's a bad theory. I dig it. I just already had something. But it's not a systems theory. It has, I'm guessing there are some IFS people out there that integrate systems into it, and then I have to get into the weeds on what is a systemic theory and what makes it systems. But maybe some of you, just in my butchering of family systems theory, very briefly, can see that there really is an overlap, right? Now, the way I described it might involve that, and I don't even know if that's an IFS thing, of like the way the parts interact with each other. I think that's why they even called it internal family systems, or why they called it systems, because, it's like, well, we all know family systems, like, parents and kids and aunts and uncles. We understand that. And what if we had one of those in our own minds? Okay, but it's a metaphor, right? We don't actually have parts of us interacting with each other. It's just a way to understand or to describe what's happening inside of us. Like when I was really trying hard to speak as if I understood IFS. I've talked about that dynamic countless other times, and I've never used internal family systems language. I've used language of, well, when you're hurt, then because you haven't been modeled, or you feel particularly hurt and you don't trust that the other person will receive your hurt safely, and so instead you bury it or you get angry. That's another way to describe the exact same thing, and might even have the exact same outcome in your own mind as a useful model or in therapy. But I'm not talking about parts of the self. I'm not talking about interactions between the parts of the self. I could talk about in terms of the object relations and the interjects. Anyway, so it's a pet peeve of mine that internal family systems is considered a systems theory, and that people from the outside will think of it as a family systems theory, as you did, long-term patron, because you're like, is family systems theory the same as internal family systems? Because to me, family systems theory, and systems theory more generally, is a powerful and difficult thing to understand. I taught systems theory. I taught a class called, I can't remember the name of the class, but it was systems was in the title. And I had yet to get my mind around systems theory before I taught it. And I really tried hard to understand the things that I was teaching. I knew it well enough, I guess, to be able to teach it to people that had no idea. But it took me a long time. And it's not something that you can just learn quickly. It's a whole philosophy. It's a whole paradigm shift. And people, because I've observed it. As someone that eventually figured out what systems theory was, I tried to download this into my students, and I would spend a lot of time going over this with my students. And I designed exercises. There was this one exercise that I designed. It was part of a larger paper that they would write. It was 40 pages long or something. And the one part that even the best students would get wrong would be the systems portion. And it had to do with me asking them to conceptualize a client through a systemic lens, and they would give it a shot, either in a couple sentences or a paragraph. And it was rare that anyone put to paper something that I said, yeah. Most people weren't even close to the line, And I wasn't a hard ass. I wasn't. It didn't have to be perfect. I was like, it just has to be like for your at your point in your career. I'm expecting a pretty low bar to clear, but I understood because it took me a long ass time to get it, and it's complicated, and it's so hard to get away from linear thinking. And once there's a middle phase that I think I was in for a long time, where I basically understood systems theory, but when I applied it, I would word things as if I understood systems theory, but I was still thinking linearly. So I was tricking myself and maybe other people into thinking that I was solidly thinking systemic. But if you actually look at what I was actually saying, even though I'm avoiding linear phrases and I'm using systemic phrases, I'm actually thinking linearly. And I would detect that in people. I'll give an example and then I'll adjourn because I'm yammering too much. But one example that I would see a lot, so I'd be asking my students to conceptualize a client, and they would know enough. So the question they're trying to answer is, why does the presenting problem exist? Whether it's an individual or a couple or a family, there's a presenting problem. Our teenager is running away from home and smoking pot every day and getting bad grades and skipping school and fighting with us all the time. Okay, that's one presenting problem. Another presenting problem is a couple comes in and they're saying, we are at the verge of divorce because we're fighting, we're bickering all the time. An individual comes into therapy and says that they have low self-esteem and they think about suicide. Okay, there's a whole variety of presenting problems. So I would ask the students, why does that presenting problem exist? And it sounds like, I imagine to y'all, like a pretty complicated question, because it is. But I'm guessing for a lot of y'all, you also think, well, yeah, I mean, shouldn't clinicians and therapists be able to answer that question? That is the important question, at least to ask yourself as a therapist, because if they're coming to therapy with a problem and you have no idea why that problem exists, then what are you doing as a clinician? And I'm here to tell you, there's a lot of therapists out there that not only can't answer that question because they haven't been mentored and taught well, but many of them have either convinced themselves or have been told that to answer such a question is hubris. And I say, humbug to that. I don't know if that's the right application of that word, but I say, even if you eschew the typical conceptualizations, like a cognitive one or a mechanistic explanation, you need to have some justification for charging money and providing treatment. You can't just say, well, I just believe in people. Okay. And maybe there's something there. There's a way. Anyway, so I would ask them this question, and they would, I would have students, and I'm trying to come up with a hypothetical example of a student that did well, but it was using all the language of systems, but it was still linear. And it might be hard for me to do this because I do think systemically. I've really beat it into my head over the past 30 years, but I would have, let's say I had a student, and I read a lot of these paragraphs, so a lot of them are coming to mind, not specifics, but like the themes. So I might have a student that would say, and some of you listening might actually have been one of my students. In fact, I know some of you listening would have been one of my students that wrote this paragraph and actually had me ding you for it. You probably also, hopefully, heard me say, it's okay. I don't expect you to get it, but keep trying, because this is why you're here, to learn systems theory, and it's powerful. It's not the only way, but it's powerful. It's harder to learn. It's like, to get through life as a therapist, you need two tools. One of them, you just walk over to the toolbox and you pull it out and you got it. That's linear thinking. The other one, you have to search around the countryside through everything I'm looking for. But you need both tools is a thing. Anyway, so a typical example would be someone to write, and they, so let's say it's a family with a teenager that is, like I said earlier, that hypothetical, that example I gave, and the clinician writing it out, in their heart, what they want to say is, well, the mom is a jerk face. That's why the daughter is misbehaving, because the mom is rigid, she's insulting, she's distant, and the kid is acting out. So that's what the clinician wants to say. And, as I will repeat, that is a linear perspective, and it's potentially a helpful and maybe the most relevant explanation. So I'm not saying it's a bad explanation. It's just, Easy. You walk over to the toolbox, that's easy. Blame the mom, pretty easy. Sometimes it is the mom's fault or one of the parents. Or that's part of the conceptualization. The other one, though, sorry, but so the student wants to say that. It's the mom's fault. She's a jerk face. But the student knows that I'm going to be reading it and that ain't going to fly. So they're like, okay, think systems. I'm like, okay, well, and I provide a lot of ways. One of the ways that I guide people to help them get to a systems way of thinking is to start linear and then zoom out and look at the other side and try to determine what could possibly, so you have mom, who is a jerk face, rigid, distant, and critical, and the mom is doing something to the daughter, and the daughter is having an understandable reaction to that and is doing all those defiant things, okay? So that one I get, here to here, A, B, A causes B. Then, if we were trying to think systemically, how does B cause A? And you'll get a lot of raised eyebrows. Wait, how does the teenager cause mom to be basically abusive? No, I'm not going to blame the daughter for that. So we got to go down a lot of roads of like, what does blame have to do with it? We're talking about a model for understanding. We're also not talking about the only way of understanding. We're also not talking about the truth. We're talking about trying things on for size. And if you have that much resistance to even just in your head, you're not even talking to the family. You're just in your head saying, okay, if I just hypothetically just thought like B is causing A, that teenager is causing mom to be critical and to be overbearing and to be distant, what would that be? Now, maybe there's nothing there, but there usually is. And then people say, but I don't want to blame the daughter. It doesn't have to do with blame. It has to do with divorcing yourself from looking at who's to blame. That's a linear way of thinking. Now, sometimes someone is to blame. If the mom's being abusive, we blame the mom for that. It's just cut and dry. But we can also zoom out and see that there's a possibility that because of the history of the family, maybe the daughter resents the mom for divorcing her dad, and maybe the daughter has low self-esteem because of external reasons like church or school or something, and is taking it out on the mom and purposely smoking pot to some extent and skipping school to passive aggressively get back at the mom, and is provoking the mom to be more critical, and it's back and forth. And as a systems thinker, if we take blame out of the picture, so that's what I would say, right? So and that's just one systemic way. It's a crude way, but it's a beginning to seeing things in a systemic way. The way that things are recursive and mutually causing, circular causality rather than linear. But the issue is in systems theory, you incorporate all the elements of the system, not only those two people, but potentially the way I think about it is their internal drives as well, attachment, this kind of stuff, and history and trauma. But there's also more people in the family. There's also more people in the system. You got people in the community. You have their friends. You have extended family. You have the teachers. You have me, So how do I get a circle? It's not a circle anymore. It's like the way to think about systems theory is everything's happening at once. And everyone, people don't take turns. Mom is in a jerk face and then kid takes a turn and acts out. Everything's happening at the same time. And kid acts out and mom does her thing. And then, sometimes you can look at little sequences, little micro sequences, like mom comes home, notices kid isn't home, mom calls kid, and you sort of go down the line and you can look at sequences of causality and it will illuminate a system, but it's not the only way of evaluating a system. Anyway, so what I would get from a student is they, in their heart, think it's mom's fault. And they do that exercise of, okay, I remember, okay, the circular causality. Okay, A causes B. How does B cause A? And then they say, okay, well, and they start the first sentence, say, mom, the mother is, due to her childhood issues, which I don't really know of yet because I haven't had enough time to assess the mom, she is overbearing and critical, and she is dismissive and avoidant, whatever, attachment, and is parenting in a way that is very hurtful to the daughter. And the daughter is doing all these other behaviors, and that is causing the mom to be very activated as a parent. If you're still listening to this episode, I wonder if it's self-evident how that is linear. Does that make sense? Is the way that I worded that? Because although I'm doing A causes B and sort of B causes A, it still is seemingly presenting a scenario in which really A is causing the whole situation. The mom is causing the whole situation. Instead of really in your heart, and that's that paradigm shift of, and I hope it kind of was apparent when I was playing around with like a hypothetical way in which one could say the daughter is causing the mother's behavior. And sometimes it requires some leaps of faith because you haven't assessed things yet. Like the way that I worded it of like, well, maybe because of the teenage daughter's self-esteem issues independent of a relationship with her mom, or maybe just because of the past with the mom, or who knows, she is passive-aggressively getting back at the mom by doing things that are self-destructive to provoke the mom, which is causing the mom to engage in her critique. Okay. Maybe because I've been thinking linearly, I haven't even asked those kind of questions. I haven't looked into the inner workings of the daughter and tried to look for clues of passive aggressiveness, not as a way of confirming my theory, but as a way of just seeing if this hypothesis is even close to the mark and would require more questions and more assessment. And it's hard, of course, when you're talking to a teenager who doesn't want to be in therapy, it's hard. But anyway, so how did I get down this road? So systems theory is hard. Internal family systems has really little to do with that. I would argue nothing to do with that. Not that it's a bad theory. It's 2 thumbs up theory. I love internal family systems. It's just not a systemic theory. Because it, at least in the way that I understand it, it doesn't incorporate any of that. It doesn't incorporate your external world at all, really. I mean, it has to do with input and then an internal role evaluation of like, okay, who's best to kind of step forward, and the kind of rigidity of those roles. And the way that they frame it, it sounds very family systems, like it uses the language, but it's not actually systemic theory. But, I could be speaking out of my ass. If you believe that internal family systems is truly a systems theory, email in. It's probably, I tell people on the forum, your email needs to be short, because if everyone writes a book, we'll only have time, because Stacy has to read them and then I have to. And so if we need more information, I'll ask, and sometimes I do. So just give the basics, try to fit it in. And if you're like, oh, there's more information, just say that, hey, if you need more information, email me. Sometimes I do. But this explanation, if you believe that internal family systems is a truly systems, in the general system sense theory, then that email is going to be kind of long, or it might be short. Maybe you're just really concise and elegant in your wording. I could see that happening. Then email in via the website. I welcome the debate because I love this shit. And I also know that I'm speaking out of my ass, and I'm operating from an understanding of it. I've had a number of supervisees who specialize in internal family systems, and so I would, during those years, become expert enough in internal family systems to be able to effectively supervise and mentor these people. But it's been years since that was true, and so I am operating from a lot of old, sort of vague impressions, as you can tell. And this was a long episode. I was planning on only talking for like 40 minutes, but this has got to be a couple hours. I don't know. Every email that I've answered in this episode, I have a lot of passion about, apparently. And everyone out there, if you're watching this on YouTube, yikes to me for being such a yammerer. Or let's celebrate it. I mean, if you're still watching or listening, you're either asleep, bored, or you're in. I do when there's my favorite podcast, TBTL. They will sometimes apologize to the listeners when they go long, and I'm always like, no, this is. I love the long episodes. Those are my favorite. When they get a little, raggedy on the edges, a little more loose, and usually there's a reason why it's going long, that sort of. Anyway, but I don't want to assume what's in your mind. So if you want to give me a yikes, my shirt says yikes already for you. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.